I want to tell you something I refused to believe for many years because it was too different from what I was taught, what I saw, and what I lived. But I can't keep it to myself any longer. Because if I once walked through days full of struggle and still couldn't touch the feeling of abundance, then I know you, the one reading these words, might be walking a similar path. And if you truly listen, if you truly allow yourself to believe something different, something that was never taught in school or written in accounting books, everything will change. I used to think that in order to be wealthy, I had to do a lot. I had to wake up early, stay up late, carry heavy burdens, endure things I hated, and believe that one day, when it's enough, I would be rewarded. That was what I was taught. Hard work is the only road to success. But what about reality? I have seen people work their whole lives, labor 3 times harder than others, yet still not have enough. I used to be the one waking up at 5 a.m., writing everything down, working without rest, and yet my bank account was just enough to scrape by. Then I started to notice something that defied all logic. There were people who, simply by being present, money seemed to find them. They weren't in a hurry, they weren't desperate, they didn't sweat blood and tears in the traditional definition of success. They simply attracted. I didn't understand that until I started to look at money in a completely different way. No longer as a number, no longer as a reward, but as living energy. That's right. I want you to think of money as a sentient being. It's not persuaded by those trying to chase it. It's drawn toward those who vibrate at the same frequency, those who carry within them a state of I am ready. And that was when I realized wealth is not the result of effort. It is the response to energy. When I changed the way I thought about money, I also changed the way I felt about it. I no longer saw it as an outsider, cold and distant. I began to see it as a friend who only comes when you create a space to welcome it with gratitude and serenity. I no longer went after money. I began to let money come to me. I no longer made plans to capture it, but instead asked myself, how can I become the kind of person that the energy of money loves to be around? You may ask me, how do I change the energy within myself? And I will tell you this. You don't need to learn some mystical religious ritual. You just need to change how you feel about yourself. When you wake up feeling abundant, feeling worthy, feeling like life is a fertile field rather than a battlefield, that is the moment you start vibrating at the frequency of wealth. And you'll see, from places you never expected, opportunities will come. People you never planned for will offer help. Invitations to collaborate will naturally find you, not because you tried harder, but because you became someone with the right energy. I tell you this not because it's easy to believe. I know you may still doubt, because I once did. But I share it with you as someone who has lived in both worlds, the world of effort and the world of vibration. And I can honestly tell you, the second world is not only more pleasant, but far more effective. Because you no longer trade your life just to survive. You simply live in alignment with your abundant self, and everything else starts to revolve around you like a mysterious gravitational force. I'm not saying you don't need to work. I'm saying the energy you bring into your work determines the real value you receive. If you work from a state of fear, rush, and lack, you are broadcasting that frequency, and the universe will return to you similar scenarios. But if you work from a place of joy, passion, and a deep belief that you are creating real value, you are aligning yourself with the flow of wealth. You may not feel this in just a day or two, but like planting a seed, you only need to keep nurturing, because wealth doesn't come from the first sowing, but from the one who is consistent in tending to their energy every day. And at some point, as you're walking peacefully in your own serenity, you'll look back and realize money is following you. No need to call, no need to chase. You just need to be you, the highest vibrating version of yourself. I want you to remember this. Money does not respond to begging. It responds to frequency. Let every morning you wake up be a gentle declaration to the universe, I am ready to receive. And then little by little, you'll see Wealth is no longer something distant. It becomes a reflection of the person you are becoming. And I know if I once didn't believe, but now I get to live this truth, then so can you. All it takes is for you to allow yourself to believe. All it takes is for you to choose a new path, not one of bending and burdening, but of walking open-heartedly with the energy of someone who is already abundant from within. And I will walk with you, one part at a time, one chapter at a time, to tell you everything I've learned on this journey. Because I believe money never chases anyone. It is drawn to those who have awakened their energy. I realized something that changed the entire way I live and earn money. The outer world is not the cause of what I experience. It is merely a mirror that reflects precisely what is vibrating inside me. Not many people believe this right away because from a young age, we're taught that life is a series of objective events, that circumstances shape the person. But I'm here to tell you, circumstances don't create you. It is you, with every thought, emotion, and vibrational state, who calls those circumstances in to reflect you back to yourself. This universe doesn't operate by randomness. It operates by resonance. I used to think I was just a victim of events, that when work was difficult, when finances were lacking, it was because of the market, the customers, or bad luck. But I started paying closer attention. Within the same market, at the same time, there were still people rising above. Within the same circumstances, there were still people being offered opportunities. I could no longer keep blaming the outside when the inside of me wasn't bright enough. And from the moment I was willing to look inward, I understood it's not circumstances that create energy, but energy that creates circumstances. The universe does not discriminate, does not favor. It simply operates like an invisible mirror, extraordinarily precise. Imagine this: every emotion you carry, every thought you nurture, is a wave being emitted from you. And the universe, like a still lake, merely reflects back exactly the frequency you emit. When you carry lack, worry, insecurity within you, you're transmitting the signal, I am not enough. And the lake responds with situations that make you feel even less. But if you begin to live as if you already have, already are enough, already worthy, you will see the universe respond with matching reflections. I don't say this from theory. I say this from deep experience, from what I've lived, observed, and experimented with, not just once. I remember clearly a time in my life when I was at the bottom financially. No income, no clear opportunities, and every morning I woke up feeling suffocated by fear. But then, because I was too tired of struggling, I began to let go. I no longer tried to rescue myself. I simply stopped and turned inward. Every morning I sat in silence and asked myself, if I no longer needed to be afraid of anything, if I truly believed the universe always worked in my favor, how would I feel? And in that state, I began to feel a new kind of energy. No more panic, no more forcing, but calmness, peace. I started sending out different signals, not through words, but through my very presence. And then strange things happened. An old friend suddenly contacted me with a collaboration offer. A small sum of money I thought I had lost was unexpectedly returned. An opportunity came from a place I had never even considered, not because I took more action, but because I became a different version of myself. And the universe was merely faithfully reflecting that version, just like a mirror always reflects the image standing before it, without judgment, without alteration, only with precision. That's why I tell you, if you want to change the world out there, you don't need to change the whole world. You only need to change the mirror in. When you raise your vibrational frequency, you don't need to climb to reach anything. You just need to be still and let all that already belongs to you find its way to you. I know this may sound mystical, especially to those trained in logic, science, and action-oriented thinking, but remember this: even modern quantum physics has proven that matter is the result of energy, not the other way around. And You are a living field of energy emitting frequency every second, every minute. If you're wondering why money hasn't arrived, why opportunities haven't opened, why you're still stuck in recurring patterns, don't rush to look outward. Look into the mirror within you and ask yourself, what am I emitting? You can't fool the mirror. You can say positive words, repeat affirmations, but if deep down you still carry fear, doubt, and a sense of unworthiness, the universe will respond to that exact emotional state. That's why so many people try all the techniques and still see no results, because techniques are only the outer shell, while energy is the true substance. I want you to start trying one small thing. Every morning, before beginning your day, take 3 minutes just to feel. Don't think about what you have to do. Don't worry about outcomes. Just feel that you are living in a world where anything is possible, and that you have the right to choose the first emotion to start your day. If you choose peace, choose gratitude, choose trust. Hold that vibration like a background melody playing through you, and then observe how the world responds to you, not immediately, but surely, because the mirror never lies. At this point, I no longer see the world as I once did. I no longer believe I'm a tiny individual in a vast universe. I see myself as an extension of that very universe, and every vibration I emit is a signal calling forth what resonates with it. And so are you. You are not small. You are not abandoned. You only need to remember one simple thing you may have forgotten. The world is not against you. It is merely reflecting you. And you can choose again at any moment. I chose again. And I'm here to tell you the universe is listening to you through the frequency you live by each day. Thomas walked through the desert, feet bleeding, eyes burning under the scorching sun, his throat parched from days of thirst. He kept going, step by step, holding on to a fragile hope that somewhere ahead a stream of saving water awaited. But what he didn't know, and had no chance of knowing, was that right beneath his feet, just beneath a thin layer of sand, flowed a cool, clear underground river, enough to sustain an entire group for many years. Thomas died not because he lacked water, but because he lacked awareness of where life was already present. And that's what haunts me. Not just the story itself, but the fact that I was once Thomas. I used to search for opportunity everywhere, chasing markets, enrolling in every class, diving into any relationship that seemed like it might open a prosperous path. I believed that if I tried hard enough, stayed persistent, the results would eventually show up. But I was wrong. Not because I was lazy, but because I never stopped to ask myself one very simple yet crucial question. What am I standing on that I can't see? Have you ever felt that way? Like you're trying your hardest, but everything still feels just out of reach, still missing the mark? Like you're stuck in some invisible veil, spinning in circles but unable to break free? If so, then I invite you to stay with me until the end of this journey, because I believe this is the part you need most in order to unlock something deep within you. But before I go on, do something small for yourself if you truly want to break through that thin layer of sand. If you believe that beneath the current struggle lies a source of prosperity waiting to be uncovered, comment under this video, "I dare to change," or any commitment you wish to send out to the universe. That is your first act of broadcasting a different signal, a conscious choice. You see, the greatest lesson I learned from Thomas's story is not in his death, but in the painful truth that many people are living just like him, only they haven't collapsed yet. They pass through each day with a weary mind, searching eyes, and a dried-up heart, while all the abundance they need is right beneath them, within reach, yet hidden by an old layer of awareness. And that layer was not created by fate, but by the very things they've believed to be true, that wealth is hard, that money is limited, that opportunity belongs to someone else. It took me too many years to realize this. The only thing stopping me from accessing the river of prosperity was the wrong map in my mind. I had believed the wrong things. I had seen things the wrong way. And that led me astray, not from the world, but from my own capacity to receive. until I started asking different questions. No longer, how can I make more money, but instead, what in me is pushing money away? And when the question changed, the answers began to arrive. I started to recognize every thought of lack, every sentence I had repeated like a curse. I'm not good enough. I'm just not lucky. I wasn't born to be wealthy. All of those beliefs were the layers of sand covering the water. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you so you can grasp a very clear truth. Wealth is not something you have to chase. It's something you must open to receive. And that openness begins with awareness. When you begin to see that your beliefs are the background software running every financial outcome, when you understand that consciousness creates circumstances, not the other way around, you will stop searching for water in faraway places. You'll start digging exactly where you stand. And I'm sharing this not just because I want you to change. I say it because I want you to be truly wealthy, not just in money, but in awareness, in power, in inner freedom. Because I believe this, every person who becomes wealthy makes the world a little richer too. When you no longer live in fear, you become generous. When you're no longer fighting to survive, you begin to contribute. When you're no longer trapped in scarcity, you become a source of inspiration. And I want to live in a world like that, where we don't compete to survive, but lift each other up to thrive. So I don't just want you to listen, I want you to understand, I want you to feel, and I want you to choose, not for me, but for you. Because you don't deserve to die of thirst while standing above your own underground river. You deserve to see it, to receive it, to live fully with the prosperous potential that has always been within you. I won't promise you an easy map, but I do promise, if you walk with me to the end of this journey, layer by layer, truth by truth, you will no longer be the same person, and what you once thought was a far-off dream will become your new normal. Once again, if you're still here, if you're still listening, if your heart just ached a little because you saw yourself in Thomas, leave a commitment below. I dare to change. Because that is the first sentence that opens your water source, and I'm here to walk with you, step by step, until you no longer seek wealth, but wealth seeks you. I want to tell you a story that seems simple on the surface, but it awakened in me a profound realization. Sometimes what you're searching for isn't far away, doesn't require a new horizon or a grand journey. It may be quietly resting in the most ordinary corner of your life, just waiting for you to be awake enough to see it. Elizabeth was a young woman who inherited an old wooden box from her late grandmother. To her, at the time, the box seemed meaningless, just a pile of papers, old documents, a piece of memory that felt irrelevant to the younger generation. She stored it away in the attic where it gathered dust over the years. Until one day, for no particular reason, she opened it and discovered old investment stock certificates that had been forgotten for decades, now worth millions. That treasure had always been there, but it only truly became hers when she stopped, opened it, and truly looked. Elizabeth's story isn't just about money. It's a powerful metaphor for how we often overlook the most valuable things because we think they're too familiar, too old, too insignificant. But sometimes those are exactly the places where true abundance resides. And I came to realize this when I looked back at my own life. I used to think wealth would arrive through a big idea, a large-scale project, or some grand turning point. I kept searching in the future, in people I hadn't yet met, in places I hadn't yet been. All the while, in my own home, in the skills I already possessed, in the relationships I once deemed ordinary. There were already doors waiting to open. I just never saw them because I had never paused long enough to look deeper. We live in a time where we're taught to always look outward, to chase more, to renew and upgrade everything. But I've come to realize there's a kind of prosperity that doesn't lie in what's new, but in what already exists, yet hasn't been seen the right way. Wealth, in many cases, doesn't need to be created. It simply needs to be recognized. Just like Elizabeth, She didn't need to do anything to make that money appear. She just had to open the box and realize what she had. I think of all the times in my life I've overlooked such boxes, a skill I dismissed, an offer I didn't take seriously, a conversation I considered trivial but that could have led to a meaningful connection. We undervalue what's familiar. And that's how wealth quietly slips out of our reach. I began changing my habits. Instead of rushing toward new things, I revisited my life, the unfinished projects I had abandoned, the old friends I hadn't contacted in years, the ideas I had once dismissed as not the right time. And something strange happened. As I began opening the boxes within myself, doors started to open outside me, too. An old friend, someone I had once worked with unsuccessfully, suddenly introduced me to a major business partner. A past project that had brought no profit, once approached with a renewed mindset, became a key source of income. The old things were no longer old when my perception was new, and that changed everything. I believe most of us are not lacking in opportunities or resources. We simply lack the ability to see the true value of things that are too close, too familiar. It's like a dark room full of treasure, but you've never turned on the light, not because you don't have the light, but because you never believed that room held anything important. I want you to understand this. The wealth you've been waiting for might be lying right there in that room, in a skill you once learned but never developed, in a relationship you once built but never unlocked, in an experience you once lived but never knew how to transform. Everything can become a wellspring of abundance if you're willing to look again. From the day I changed how I see, I no longer viewed daily life as a repetitive routine, but as a treasure chest waiting to be discovered. Every conversation could be an opportunity. Every old object could be a clue. Every emotion that arises during the day could be a map guiding me back to myself, and from there, closer to fullness. I no longer wait for something big to happen. I choose to live deeply in the little things, because I know now Elizabeth's box is not just a random story. It is a metaphor for how the universe tests us each day, not through scarcity, but through concealment. You may think you've already walked through everything in life, but let me say this to you gently. Maybe you still haven't opened the most important box. And that box may not be somewhere far away. It could be in a forgotten memory, in a failure you buried too quickly, in a youthful passion you abandoned, or even in the way you look at yourself every day. When you change your perspective, the old becomes new. When you begin to honor what once seemed ordinary, they can reveal extraordinary surprises. I don't need you to search far and wide anymore. I only want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, is there something I once overlooked that might hold a treasure I have yet to unlock? Because if Elizabeth could move from struggle to abundance with one simple act of reopening an old box, then you can do the same with the life you already have. And maybe, just maybe, what you need has never left you. It's only been waiting for you to be perceptive enough to look again, humble enough to open it, and trusting enough to receive it. That's not magic. That is the nature of every miracle in this life. I remember the first time I sat still in a quiet room, closed my eyes, and asked myself, if I were already living in abundance, how would I feel? There was no money in my account at that moment, no contracts waiting to be signed, no sign from the outside world giving me a reason to believe I was wealthy. But I asked anyway, and I allowed myself to imagine, not as a way to escape reality, but as an intentional act, as if I were training for a life that hadn't arrived yet, but could. I imagined myself walking with a relaxed posture. I imagined my eyes no longer rushing, but filled with gratitude. I saw myself drinking coffee without checking the clock, without looking at messages, out of fear of missing work. I saw myself giving easily, not because I had excess, but because I had enough. Every breath I took was flavored with peace, and in that exact moment I began to feel something very strange. That imagination was no longer just a game in my mind, it became a real state in my body. I discovered that abundance is not a number, it's a feeling. And the beautiful thing is, you don't need to wait until you have lots of money to feel it. On the contrary, you need to learn how to feel it first. And then money will come as part of the resonance. I had heard that from many people, read it in books, heard it in talks, but I had never truly absorbed it until I experienced it for myself. When I began creating the feeling of wealth in my very breath, everything around me began to soften. No more urgency, no more struggle, just full presence with what was already there, and a deep inner trust that I am not lacking. I have never been lacking. I know this might sound vague to those who are struggling day by day. I've been there too. I was once the person who couldn't sit still because my mind was constantly pulled toward unpaid bills, unfinished projects, nameless worries. But precisely because I lived in that state for so long, I deeply understand no action plan, no strategy is strong enough to save you from the loop of scarcity if your inner state is still broadcasting a poverty frequency. And conversely, when you change your inner state, you begin to create a new energy field, one in which all good things have a reason to come closer. I began practicing something very simple each morning. Before touching my phone, before thinking about what I needed to do that day, I placed my hand on my chest, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath with the question, if I were living in abundance, how would I feel right now? And then I held that state. No forcing, no pressure, just feeling. I didn't try to create images of mansions or luxury cars. I just needed to feel safe, to feel lighthearted, to feel each breath flowing freely without being cut off by anxiety. Strangely, ever since I maintained that practice each day, my outer world began to change, not dramatically, but noticeably. The people I met became more pleasant. The decisions I made became less impulsive. The opportunities that once felt distant suddenly seemed to arrive right on time. I no longer earned money from a state of, I have to have, but created value from the state of, I already have. And that was what made others trust me, work with me, and willingly offer not just money, but also respect. I gradually came to understand that breathing with abundance is not a technique, it's a way of living. It's how you treat yourself in the most ordinary moments. It's how you choose to see the world as a place that's supporting you, not testing you. It's how you open your heart to every little thing, a warm cup of tea, the first sunlight of the day, an unsaid thank you. When you feel you already have everything, you don't need to shout for life's attention. You just need to whisper, and the universe will listen. I'm telling you this not because I've reached some ultimate level. I'm still human, still forget sometimes, still feel lost. But there's one thing I'll never forget again. I can return to a state of fullness with just one breath. And if I can do that, so can you. You don't need to wait for one more condition to begin feeling wealthy. You just need to choose to feel it right here, in this very body, with this very breath. Let abundance no longer be the destination, but the starting point. Let each of your days begin with a feeling that you are entering the world as someone who has, who is enough, who is worthy. No one can take that from you unless you choose to forget. And you don't need to forget anymore, because you've begun to remember that wealth is not something you chase, it is something you allow yourself to become. And sometimes it all begins with one small act, inhaling as if you were already living in prosperity, and trusting that this very feeling will lead you home. William was a British scholar renowned for his meticulous nature and deep passion for history. He had spent many years wandering across the Middle East in search of ancient cultural artifacts. But the story I'm about to share with you isn't just about archaeology. It's the story of a stone, a weathered clay tablet, and how it completely changed my understanding of wealth. William spent months deciphering the inscriptions carved into the surface of that tablet, and eventually he realized this wasn't merely a historical record, it was a practical guide on how an ordinary person could become wealthy, right in the midst of a city burdened by debt and chaos. The story recorded on that tablet followed the journey of a brickmaker named Dabasir, once poor, drowning in debt, barely surviving in a crowded market. But instead of lamenting his fate or running away, he chose to face life with a new discipline. Every coin he earned, he divided into 3 parts. 1 part to repay his debts, 1 part for living expenses, and 1 part to save and invest for the future. No complexity, no get-rich-quick tricks, no flashy secrets, just persistence, consistency, and a deep respect for principle. And the miracle was, within just a few years, Dabasir went from being buried in debt to becoming one of the most respected and prosperous men in Babylon. Reading that story through William's account stunned me, not because it was something I had never heard before, but because it was so simple that everyone has heard it somewhere, yet so few truly follow it. I asked myself, how many times in my life had I ignored such fundamental principles because I thought I'd do it later, or that now's not the right time? How many times had I earned money only to spend it all without keeping a single portion for the future? How many times had I said I wanted to be wealthy, yet lived as if everything existed to serve my immediate feelings? I realized that it's the small principles, if preserved as sacred laws, that can transform a person's life completely. You don't need to be rich to start living like someone who respects money. On the contrary, it is by treating each small amount of money as if it matters that the universe begins to believe you are worthy of having more. And when the universe believes in you, you no longer have to chase money. Money starts to find its way to you. Dabasir didn't wait to be rich to begin saving. He saved so he could become rich. And that is the lesson I relearned, not from a modern financial expert, but from a clay tablet over 2,500 years old. I applied that lesson by starting very small. Every time I received income, whether big or small, I divided it like Dabasir. Sometimes the amount saved was just enough for a cup of coffee, but I stuck to the principle, not because of the money itself, but because of the mindset. I wanted my mind to understand that I am someone who respects finances. I am someone capable of managing abundance. I do not overspend to compensate for emotional emptiness. I keep a portion because I trust I will need it for greater opportunities ahead. And do you know what happened? When I started to keep, the world began to keep for me too. Opportunities no longer slipped away like they used to. Calls, offers, investments I thought had passed me by suddenly returned. I understood then, not every opportunity lies in the market. Some only come to those with discipline. And discipline is the one thing you can start today, no permission required. William didn't just translate an ancient script. He opened a door into human nature that in any era, prosperity has always been a reward for those who live with order. I used to think wealth was a matter of timing and luck. Now I understand it's a matter of character. And nothing reveals character more clearly than how you treat what you already have, whether it's 10 small coins or an unexpected fortune. I'm not telling you this to paint a fairy tale. I'm sharing it because I know that right now you might be in a situation like Dabasir once was, in debt, worried, feeling trapped in a life without direction. But if you begin to look again with one principle, one discipline, one commitment, you'll see the path unfold, not quickly, not glamorously, but surely. Because real wealth doesn't come from speed, it comes from direction. When William closed his journal about that stone tablet, he wrote a final line that struck me deeply. Some of the greatest secrets don't rest in high places, but lie buried beneath the dust of forgetfulness. I thought about that line for a long time, and I want you to remember this. It's not that the world lacks guidance, it's that we've forgotten how to read it. And sometimes all you need to do is return to a very old lesson that's still true. Repay your debts, spend consciously, and save as if you'll live another 100 years. The tablet is gone. William has long since rested, but that lesson remains unchanged. For you, for me, for anyone ready to begin again, right from where they stand. You don't need luxury. You only need honesty. You don't need brilliance. You only need commitment. And if you are patient enough to live by principle, you will no longer need to seek wealth. You will become an essential part of it. Caroline was a painter I met at a small exhibition in a seaside town. She wasn't famous. Her work didn't appear on magazine covers, and no upscale gallery represented her. But there was something truly special about her paintings, something words couldn't quite capture, something you could only feel. I stood for a long time in front of a simple landscape painting she titled Summer's Dream. There was nothing revolutionary in its composition, no groundbreaking technique, but there was a strange vitality that radiated from every layer of paint, every brushstroke, as if the painting hadn't just been created by her hand, but by her heart, her breath, her full presence. When I asked Caroline why she painted, she simply smiled and softly said, "Because I can't not paint. Every time I pick up a brush, it's like a part of my soul steps into that world. If I don't paint, I feel like a piece of me is missing." Her answer left me speechless, not because it was poetic, but because I knew I had just touched a great truth. When you pour your soul into your work, that work comes alive, and money is naturally drawn to things that are alive. I've done many kinds of work, some out of duty, some for survival, and some because others told me I should. But very few times have I truly entered into my work as if it were the only thing that existed in that moment. I used to think that if I did well enough, fast enough, and met the target, the results would follow. But then I realized the real difference lies in the energy you pour into what you do, not just the skill. Some people make a bowl of pho that customers never forget, not because of exotic ingredients, but because of how it's prepared, with wholehearted care. Some people sell flowers by the roadside, yet each bouquet is wrapped like a precious gift. Some teach, write, garden, and every small act is filled with soul, with life. And where there is life, money flows as a natural response. I began reflecting on the work I was doing. Some of it I did with quiet resentment just to get it done. Some I did out of fear of being left behind, or to prove something. But rarely did I do anything in the state Caroline described. I can't not do this because my soul needs it. So I decided to change, not my career, but the way I stepped into each task. I chose to return to that inner child who once felt joy simply by creating something, even if no one praised it. I began to write with genuine resonance, not just to check off a list. I practiced speaking to clients with grateful eyes, not out of courtesy, but from the heart. I breathed deeply before starting a project and asked silently, how much more of my soul can I put into this today? When I shifted, the responses I received began to shift too. People started telling me they could feel something in my work, in the words, in the energy. They didn't use words like efficient or professional. They spoke of emotion, connection, depth. And I understood. Money doesn't come because you're better than others. It comes because you make others feel they're touching something real, something soulful, something alive. I don't deny the importance of strategy, skill, or planning. But all of that is just machinery. What gives it power is the spirit of the one who operates it. You could open a coffee shop, but if every cup is made just for profit, customers might try it once and never return. But if you brew that cup with sincere care, as if you're offering a piece of your life, people will come back, and they'll bring others. The difference is in the invisible layer, and it's that layer that creates sustainable, visible outcomes. Caroline taught me that profound lesson, not through speeches, but through her silent presence in every painting. And I ask you, how long has it been since you've truly shown up in your work? How long have you done things just to finish, to hit a mark, to prove a point? How long since you remembered that every action, when infused with soul, can become a silent invitation to prosperity? You don't have to be an artist. You just have to be someone who lives and works authentically. And authenticity is the strongest language this world is always listening for. Caroline didn't become rich overnight, but her paintings began to sell for more, not because she was better at marketing, but because people wanted to take that energy home. They weren't paying for an image, they were paying for a feeling, a depth, a soul. And I believe if you begin showing up to your daily work with that same spirit, you too will become an irreplaceable source of energy. You don't have to try to stand out. You just have to be real, and that's different enough. I share this not to romanticize work. I know life has pressures, goals, bills to pay, but I also know this: if you can carve out even a small part of your day to do something with full presence, full soul, you will begin to shift the flow of money in your life. Not because you did it right, but because you lived it true. And living true is always what makes money want to return. Caroline didn't need to say anything more. Her paintings had already spoken. And from that moment on, I no longer worked just to complete a task. I worked to send a piece of myself into the world. Because I know now, that alone, not any plan, is what truly attracts money. I still vividly remember the feeling of the day I received the very first coin earned from work I truly poured my heart into. It wasn't lucky money. It wasn't something my parents gave me, and it wasn't a paycheck from a regular job. It was a coin I created with my own hands, from my own energy, from the genuine quality I delivered, and from an act I had devoted my full spirit to. But what I remember most was not its value. It was the strange sensation when I held it in my hand, as if it was glowing, as if it was breathing. For the first time in my life, I realized money has a soul. Before that, I used to think money was just a tool, a means to buy, to pay, to accumulate. It seemed cold, emotionless, and tied to calculations. But when I held that first coin, earned from something I loved doing, I felt like I was touching a living stream of energy. It was not just an object. It was recognition, a signal from the universe saying, you gave something valuable, and this is its symbolic return. I no longer saw money as a goal. I saw it as a natural result, a flow of energy that goes out and returns. I remember I didn't spend that coin right away. I left it on my desk for a whole week, not because I was being frugal, but because I wanted to feel more deeply what was happening. Every time I looked at it, I recalled the eyes of the person who gave it to me, grateful, sincere eyes. I remembered how I felt after completing that work. Not exhausted, but quietly exhilarated, deeply fulfilled. And I thought, if I could create one coin like that, I could create many more. But what mattered wasn't the quantity. It was the aliveness each coin carried. Have you ever really stopped to feel whether the money you hold carries anything with it? Does it have a soul, a texture, a presence, or is it just tired, hurried paper coming and going like wandering winds? I ask not to make you feel guilty, but to remind you, we have the right to form a new relationship with money, a relationship that is grateful, truthful, and alive. I began to look more carefully at how I used money. Before, I spent automatically whenever I had a need, saw a good deal, or found an opportunity. But after that first coin, I asked myself, what energy did this money come from? And when I spend it, what am I sending it into? I no longer bought things just because they were cheap if I didn't truly need them. I stopped spending on places that left me drained, like meals eaten just to escape sadness or items bought to fill emotional voids. I wanted each coin I spent to also carry living energy, to be an extension of my creativity, my gratitude, and my conscious choices. I began to call money by different names. I called it an exchange stream. I called it a confirmation. I called it the echo of value delivered. And from then on, every financial action I took carried rhythm. Money no longer felt foreign. It felt like an extension of myself. The way I received, kept, and spent it began to reflect clearly how I was living, loving, and believing in my own worth. If I simply chased money without paying attention to my inner state, money would come and go quickly, like a guest who doesn't feel respected. But when I began welcoming it with love, creativity, and gratitude, I felt that money began to love me back. It came not from force, but from attraction. Like any truly beautiful relationship, it arrives with deeper reason and stays through sincerity. I never forgot that first coin. Later, I placed it in a small frame, hung it on the corner of my workspace like a symbol, not to show off, but to remind myself every day that money can be the result of a soul living in alignment. And you don't have to be exceptionally talented, famous, or already wealthy to feel that. You just have to put your real self into the work you do. Just once, and you'll feel it. And once you've felt it, you'll never want to go back to the old way of chasing money again. I'm telling you this not to romanticize money, but to show you that in a world that often feels dry and transactional, there's still room for a beautiful relationship with it. A relationship that breathes, speaks, and listens. Money is not just something you earn, it's something you walk alongside. And if you want to change the flow of finances in your life, don't start with the numbers. Start with the feeling you get when you look at a coin you truly created from your heart. I believe you can create a coin like that, and many more, not through tricks, not through competition, but through the way you live in truth with your inner values. Because when you offer real value, the world always finds a way to respond with abundance. Sometimes beginning in the smallest way, like a single coin. But inside that coin lives a soul just waiting for you to recognize it. And once you do, you'll never see money the same way again. You'll know. Money also lives, also loves, and longs to stay near those who know how to live fully in their truth. I used to think that an inheritance was something you received from a wealthy family member. A house, a bank account, a large business, or at the very least a tangible asset you could sell, trade, or use to jumpstart a new beginning. I used to quietly resent my fate for not being born into a well-off lineage. I looked around and saw friends being supported, guided, handed an entire foundation, while I had nothing but 2 empty hands and a blur of distant memories from the past. And I lived for years in a victim mindset, not realizing that this very mentality was keeping me from accessing a far greater, deeper kind of inheritance, a spiritual legacy. Henry was the one who awakened me to this. I met him in a quiet rural town, a place I had escaped to in order to take a break from the noisy pace of city life. Henry was in his 70s, slender, but with eyes that shone with a strange clarity. He had no children, no nearby family, just a small house, a lush green garden, and a personal library filled with old, worn-out books stacked like a forgotten treasure. From the very first meeting, I sensed something different about him. Not material wealth, but an energy that was calm, grounded, and deep. It was as if he had understood something that the rest of the world was still frantically trying to find. One afternoon, when I asked Henry what he had done all his life to attain such peace, he didn't answer right away. Instead, he led me to his reading room and quietly opened an old wooden box. Inside were not money or legal documents, but handwritten letters, hundreds of them written by Henry to himself over more than 40 years. Each letter captured a lesson, a failure, a hidden emotion, or a moment of insight. "This is my inheritance," he said. "No one can inherit it by taking it. They can only inherit it by learning to live." I was speechless, because for all those years I had sought validation from the idea of a perfect family, a noble background, forgetting that the true inheritance is what you receive from the spiritual experiences of those who came before you, if you are humble enough to learn, mature enough to acknowledge, and wise enough to carry it forward. Henry didn't leave me money, but he left me something beyond measure, a deep realization that I was never empty-handed. I began to remember my grandmother, who once taught me to cherish every small coin and never to speak of poverty, no matter how poor we were. I thought of my father, a man of few words who lived a life of unwavering integrity until his final breath. I remembered my mother, who folded her pain into meals filled with love, never letting me go hungry even when she had only a few thousand dong left in her pocket. Each of them left behind an invisible kind of wealth that I had overlooked in my haste to chase the material. Henry gave me a new concept, a spiritual energy account. You can't see it, but you can feel it. It lives in how you respond to adversity, in the attitude you choose after failure, in the inner voice that speaks when you face a hard decision. Every moral value, every loving lesson, every profound experience passed down to you is a silent investment made by those who came before you. The only question is, have you noticed enough to use it? I began to look at the bloodline within me, not from a genetic perspective, but from a spiritual depth. I wrote down the lessons I'd never recorded. I sat down with living family members, not to ask how much money they made, but to listen to what they had overcome. I searched back through even the smallest memories, and for the first time, I felt rich. Not because I possessed, but because I was connected to a stream of lived experience passed to me through the lives of others. Henry passed away not long after that. He left nothing behind but his letters and an old guitar. But every time I pick up that guitar, even though I don't know how to play, I still feel one thing clearly. Every one of us holds within us a spiritual legacy waiting to be awakened. All we need to do is pause and touch the past, not with judgment, but with gratitude. And you know what? Since that day, I've never again seen myself as starting from zero. I know now that inside me lies a hidden inheritance. And my job, just like yours, is not to resent what we weren't given, but to unlock what we've always had. Because when you know where you come from, you know where you're meant to go. And when you understand that you carry a flame lit by generations before you, you stop living as someone chasing after coins. You start living as someone continuing something sacred through how you treat the present moment. I once denied this truth, but now I proclaim it. I am an heir, not to material wealth, but to a living stream of human value. And if I live awake enough, honest enough, deep enough, I too will leave behind that legacy for the next, not through a will, but through the meaningful presence I bring to each day I'm given. Margaret was an elderly woman I met during a self-development seminar. She wasn't a speaker. She didn't sit in the front row. She didn't say anything particularly remarkable, but there was something special in her eyes. Serene, warm, as though she wasn't listening just with her ears, but with her soul. I noticed her not because she did anything to stand out, but because she didn't need to. She was fully present, quietly whole, and made others feel naturally at ease just by being near. After the seminar, I approached her and we had a conversation I will never forget, not because of its length, but because of a very small detail that later changed the way I viewed awakening and abundance. Pinned to Margaret's blouse was a worn-out, unpolished badge. So simple that if you didn't look closely, you'd think it was just a decorative trinket. But I looked closely, and I saw engraved on it a tiny phrase. It began when I noticed. I asked her what those words meant. She smiled gently and didn't answer right away. Then she told me a story, softly but with such depth that I've carried it with me ever since. Margaret used to be an office employee at a large company. Her life, in her own words, was a series of days unfolding like a programmed loop. Go to work, get paid, pay bills, wait for the weekend. Everything was fine. No big crises, no breakdowns, but also nothing that made her heart race. Until one day on her way home, she passed by a neighborhood where she had lived as a child. She stopped, not for any clear reason. Her feet just naturally slowed down. And in that moment, she saw a child sitting on the steps, drawing. A crude, clumsy little sketch, but there was something pure about the way the child poured love and focus into every line. Margaret watched for a while, and suddenly a question surfaced in her mind. How long has it been since I did something simply because it made me feel alive? That was the first moment Margaret called her awakening. It didn't come from trauma, not from loss, not from a dramatic turning point, but from a moment so small, so ordinary. Yet that moment opened a chain of new realizations, bit by bit, like pieces of a puzzle falling from the sky, slowly forming a new picture of life. She didn't quit her job the next day. She didn't transform everything overnight, but she began to observe more. She began asking herself each morning, "Today, will I live like someone awake or someone asleep?" The badge, she said, was a gift she made for herself 1 year after that first noticing. A quiet reminder that you don't need thunderclaps or cosmic messages to change. You just need stillness and a willingness to start noticing the little things. A loving glance from a stranger, a breeze that unexpectedly calms your heart. A street lamp lighting up a familiar alley in such a way that makes you wonder, how many years have I lived without really seeing these things? I listened to her story and I was still. I thought about my own life. How many times I had rushed, calculated, chased big goals, all while missing hundreds of small signs around me. Signs that were like gentle invitations from the universe, soft touches to the mind, but I was too busy, too hurried, too grown up to notice. And I wondered how many times had opportunities shown up, not in the form of money or projects, but as small ideas, passing encounters, quiet inner whispers, but I wasn't still enough to recognize them. Since that meeting with Margaret, I started practicing one thing, noticing the small details, not because they were important, but because they often lead to something that is. Every night I began writing in a notebook 3 small things I had seen, felt, or received that day. A ray of sunlight falling on a book page, a warm feeling while hugging my mother, a random intuition that flickered through me, and gradually I felt more awake in each action. I worked with more depth, communicated with more sincerity, and strangely enough, I began attracting more refined financial opportunities. Softer, deeper, more aligned. I slowly understood that awakening doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes it begins with a glance. And if you're open enough to look, the world begins revealing paths that others miss because they're too fast or too busy believing that everything must come in grand form. But real life is a stream of subtle signals, and only those who are still, present, and sensitive to the beauty of the ordinary will hear that call. Margaret's badge has now become an image I always carry in my heart. I don't need to wear it, I just need to remember. It began when I noticed. You may be very close to a breakthrough in your life, but if you don't slow down, breathe deeper, and observe more intently, you might miss it. And the beautiful thing is, you don't need to know in advance. You just need to start noticing. And once you do, you'll no longer live the same. You'll no longer work the same. You'll no longer spend money the same. You'll no longer dream the same, because from that moment on, you're no longer chasing wealth. You're living within it. In every sign, every moment, every breath, you notice. And you live it fully. James was a man whose eyes always shimmered with trust, even when he spoke of days the world seemed to have long forgotten. I met him at a small seminar on personal finance, but what he shared that day wasn't about growth charts, investment strategies, or any saving secrets. What he offered was a story. Simple, old, yet it stayed with me like a diamond glistening in the middle of a desert. And that story transformed how I viewed wealth, not as something to chase, but as something waiting to be unearthed from within. The story began with a small piece of land owned by a farmer named Ali Hahed. Ali had heard tales of faraway lands where diamonds were being discovered, and that just one single stone could change one's life forever. So he immediately sold his land, left his family behind, and began a long journey searching for diamonds. He wandered from region to region, country to country, burning with the hope that someday fortune would smile upon him. But year after year, Ali found nothing but exhaustion. In the end, he died poor, broken, and in despair. The heartbreaking twist was this: after Ali left, the man who purchased his old land, yes, the very land Ali had abandoned, one morning while watering the plants near a stream, discovered a dark, gleaming stone. That stone was later confirmed to be a rough diamond. And it turned out that the land Ali had once owned lay atop one of the largest diamond mines ever discovered in history. The diamonds weren't in some faraway place. They had been right beneath Ali's feet. But he never knew, because he believed that wealth was something you had to go and find somewhere else. When James reached that part of the story, the room fell so silent I could hear my own heartbeat, because I knew, deep down, I had lived much of my life like Ali, not literally, but in mindset. I had spent years searching for more fertile ground, somewhere out there, a better job, a more perfect relationship, a quicker business opportunity. I thought, maybe I'm in the wrong place. Maybe I need to drop everything, go somewhere else, and start again. I believed the answer always lay outside, that if I searched far enough, long enough, then wealth would finally appear like a buried treasure. But after James's story, I began to look inward. I asked myself one simple question: are there diamonds lying right beneath my feet that I've failed to notice? I revisited the job I had once found dull and discovered a corner yet to be explored, a unique value I could bring through connection and insight. I reconsidered the relationships I thought were just normal and saw that when I showed up differently and listened with care, they became profound, nourishing, and deeply inspiring. I looked at myself, and for the first time I realized I wasn't lacking anything. I had only lacked depth of vision. We're often taught that we must strive to reach far, to break through, to search for something bigger. But almost no one teaches us how to pause, to look down at the ground beneath our own feet. The soil of your life is not accidental. It has history. It holds potential, and it conceals treasures yet to be unearthed. But you'll never see them unless you stop, dig deep, and believe that you can become rich right here. So I began my own excavation, not with shovels, but with questions, observation, and consistent conscious actions each day. I wrote more, not to publish, but to hear my inner voice. I spent time talking with loved ones, not out of duty, but because I believed that a word, a hug, or even silence could be a precious stone. I treated each day as though I were standing on a diamond field. And my responsibility wasn't to keep searching, but to awaken what was already there through presence. And when I shifted in this way, something remarkable happened. Everything around me began to shift too. Opportunities no longer came from distant places, but from the very connections I already had. Ideas didn't arise from big adventures, but from quiet mornings spent journaling. And money, it began to come not from where I expected, but from places I had once overlooked. Because when you begin to value what you already have, the universe begins to send you more of what you truly deserve. James didn't tell that story to discourage dreams. He told it so I'd understand. Dreams don't live on the distant horizon. They live beneath our feet. And I'm sharing this with you now because I know you might be just like Ali, gazing at someone else's land, thinking that somewhere far away lies the answer to all your inner restlessness. But I invite you to pause. Take a deep breath. Look down at the ground beneath you, the ground of your life, your work, your relationships, the quiet gifts you carry in your heart, and ask yourself, have I dug deep enough? Because maybe you don't need to go anywhere at all. Maybe everything you're looking for is just waiting to be recognized right where you are. And the most beautiful truth is, once you uncover that first diamond, you'll never see your land the same way again. You'll realize you were never lacking. You just needed to learn how to mine what you already possessed. With full presence, deep gratitude, and the unshakable belief that true wealth doesn't come from going far, it comes from going deep. Samuel was not a scientist, not a renowned musician, nor a meditation guru praised by the media. He was simply an elderly man living in a small wooden cabin deep in a tranquil forest, where mornings were awakened by birdsong and evenings closed gently with the soft whisper of wind weaving through the trees. I met him during a 3-day retreat, seeking refuge from the city and the chaos within me. a mix of longing for wealth and exhaustion from the pursuit of it. From the very first glance, Samuel drew my attention, not because of any remarkable appearance, but because of his presence, gentle, deliberate, yet never weary. There was a deep steadiness in him, as if every movement he made followed an invisible rhythm I couldn't quite grasp. And then, as I came closer, I noticed he always held a small object in his hand, what looked like a tuning fork made of bronze. Every so often, he'd gently strike it, listening to the sound, clear, prolonged, and mesmerizing. When I asked about it, he simply smiled and said, "I'm tuning the frequency of my life." That sentence locked my gaze. I asked what he meant, and he told me a story, not with lofty language, but with the kind of simplicity that reaches the soul. He said, each of us is a living instrument, and like a stringed instrument, we have strings, our emotions, our thoughts, our way of connecting with the world. Each string vibrates at a specific frequency. If we don't know how to tune them, they go out of sync, and our life becomes a dissonant melody. But if we learn to listen, to adjust, to pause and tune the strings, we begin to live in harmony with our true frequency. And then we don't need to chase attraction, we become it. He said money is no different. It too is a form of vibration, a wave of energy. It doesn't only flow toward those who work the hardest, but toward those who live at the right frequency. Those who know how to maintain inner balance, clarity, and alignment between their inner and outer worlds. When you're anxious, rushed, or unsettled, you emit a signal that makes money hesitate. But when you're calm, clear, and inspired, you generate a magnetic field that draws opportunity toward you. I used to think success required doing more, pushing harder, learning faster, running ahead of the crowd. But Samuel made me pause. He asked, "Have you ever stopped and listened to what kind of sound you're sending out?" I fell silent, because I never had. I had lived as if action alone was enough, never questioning what frequency my actions were built on. We live in a world too loud. The sound of traffic, notifications, advertisements, the voice in our heads. Rarely do we find a truly quiet moment to hear our own vibration clearly. And the further we drift from our true frequency, the more fatigued and lost we become, the more we do, and the less it seems to yield. Samuel didn't teach me how to make money. He taught me how to adjust the way I show up. And from there, the energy I carried began to shift. I began experimenting. Each morning, instead of diving straight into work, I'd spend a few minutes just breathing, listening to a still tone. I placed my hand over my chest and asked, what frequency am I vibrating at today? Is it anxiety, competition, or calm? If it was low, there was no judgment. I just breathed. I chose a new thought, a small thank you, a positive image. I struck the symbolic tuning fork in my mind to remind myself I have the power to adjust my frequency. When I worked from that balance, something strange happened. I did less, but accomplished more. The people I met became more open. Doors I thought were closed began to creak open, not because I pushed, but because I was aligned. I no longer had to prove I was worthy. I just had to show up in the right way, and everything began to meet me at my frequency. That doesn't mean I stopped striving, but my striving no longer carried the weight of urgency. It carried precision, like a musician playing the right string at the right note. I didn't need to play loudly. I just needed to play truly. And the world began to hear me, not because I stood out, but because I resonated. Samuel once said something I'll never forget. There's no best frequency, only the one that's most true to you. And I believe that. No one needs to become someone else to succeed. You only need to rediscover your own frequency and live in it. Wealth doesn't chase the loudest person. It flows toward the one who vibrates the deepest. I no longer see vibration as something abstract. It's how I respond to rejection. It's how I choose a thought at the start of the day. It's how I stay silent when the world feels chaotic. And from these small choices, I shape my living frequency. A frequency that not only helps me make money, but allows me to stay at peace when it arrives. I share this story with you not to say you must live slowly or meditate daily. I only want you to ask yourself, what frequency am I living at right now? And if you don't like your current frequency, know this: you can adjust it with listening, with clear intent, with a simple decision, one moment at a time. And once you do, money will no longer be a chase, it will become music. Something you and the universe play together. And each step you take, each gift you give, becomes a harmonious note. Not loud, not rushed, but deep enough to echo forever. Franklin was the first man who helped me realize that not all obstacles in the journey to wealth come from the outside world. Some invisible shackles have been buried deep long before we were even born, hidden in family stories, inherited beliefs, and seemingly harmless teachings that have quietly become the operating system for how we perceive money. I met Franklin at a talk on financial psychological inheritance, a concept that was still quite new to me at the time. And after that event, I began a journey I never thought I needed, the journey of digging into my own history. Franklin opened his talk with a sentence that made the entire room fall silent. You can't become wealthy if deep down you believe that rich people are evil. He shared that he had grown up in a working-class family. His father was a blacksmith, his mother a laundress, and his entire childhood was filled with sayings like, "Money is the root of all evil. The rich are all exploiters, and to get rich, you have to do something wrong." These sayings were never explained. They simply existed as truths in the air of his family home. And Franklin believed them, just as most children believe their parents, that they were true. So when he grew up, even though he was hardworking, intelligent, and highly regarded, Franklin could never seem to break through a certain income ceiling. Every time he had an opportunity to expand his business, invest, or take a risk, he stepped back. Not because he feared failure, but because deep down in his subconscious, he feared becoming rich. To him at the time, wealth meant losing his humanity, betraying his roots, becoming one of them, those people his family had always despised. It wasn't until Franklin began studying the psychology of money that he realized he wasn't alone. Many people are still being influenced by outdated beliefs installed in them as children. And most of those beliefs weren't even theirs, but inherited from their parents, grandparents, and ancestors. He decided to go back and have a conversation with his father, by then an old man. It wasn't an easy conversation, but in the silence that followed, a long pause, his father said something Franklin would never forget. "We hated the rich not because they were wrong, but because we never had the chance to understand them." From that moment, Franklin no longer resented his father. He began to dig deeper, not to blame, but to understand. He reread old letters from his grandfather, talked to relatives, listened to stories from the subsidy era, times of hardship, and the invisible wounds carried by the entire lineage. And Franklin realized he wasn't just living his own life, he was living in the shadow of history, a history unspoken, yet ever present, like a thread quietly tying together every financial decision, every reflex toward money, every limit he placed upon himself. When Franklin shared this, I was stunned, because I saw myself in him. I began to recall the things I used to hear as a child. "Don't dream of getting rich. It's enough just to have food and shelter. Too much money changes people, makes them fake. We're just ordinary folks. Don't compete for more." These so-called advisory statements had silently planted in me a subtle bias, that money was dangerous, that if I became rich, I would lose my essence, that poverty meant integrity and wealth meant betrayal. I couldn't go on living without facing that. I began writing down every belief about money I had ever carried in my head. And I asked, where did this belief come from? Is it really true? Who gave it to me? Did that person actually live a life I would want to live? These questions were painful, because sometimes I realized I had been loyal to a belief system built by people who themselves never got to live fully. But I also felt grateful, because through them I had a foundation, and now I had the chance to choose differently. I went back and spoke with my parents, not to change them, but to free myself. I shared with them the limitations I had carried. I said with all due respect, I will choose differently, but I am always grateful for what you passed down. And for the first time, I saw my mother's gaze soften. My father said nothing, but he placed his hand on my shoulder, just lightly, but it was the first nod I ever received when I spoke of my dream of becoming wealthy. Since that day, I no longer feel guilty about making money. I no longer feel like I need permission from my ancestors to live a prosperous life. I carry them with me as part of my history, but no longer as a burden. I see myself writing a new chapter for my family, where wealth and kindness are no longer in conflict, where prosperity is no longer a betrayal, but a continuation and evolution of the roots that once sacrificed. I'm sharing this with you today because maybe you too are carrying similar shackles without even realizing it. Maybe you're repeating choices that aren't truly yours, but those of a previous generation. Maybe you're limiting yourself because of something someone once said to you as a child, and you've never questioned whether it's still true. But you can change. You don't have to rebel. You just need to have a conversation. You don't have to erase the past. You just need to heal it through awareness. And when you do that, you're not just freeing yourself, you're paving the way for the next generation, so they no longer have to carry the invisible chains. You're turning history from a wall into a stepping stone. And when you walk forward with a liberated spirit, money will no longer be a struggle, it will become a natural part of you, like a river finally flowing free after years of being blocked by the rocks of memory. Start today. Question those old beliefs. Look at your family not to blame, but to understand. And then you'll see you don't need to cut your roots to fly. You only need to cleanse them, so that from there you can grow tall like a tree, no longer shackled, but nourished by truth, freedom, and love. I used to think that wealth was a destination, a specific number in the bank account, a bigger house, a sense of relief when bills were no longer a worry. But the deeper I traveled into the journey of self-discovery, the more I realized that's only the surface. What truly determines your ability to receive prosperity isn't what you do on the outside, but the transformation that happens within. A process I call inner alchemy. And like all ancient alchemical processes, this journey requires the presence of 4 essential elements: fire, earth, water, and air. 4 things that may seem abstract, but in reality are vivid symbols for every stage of transformation I had to undergo to cultivate a prosperity that is truly sustainable, gentle, and meaningful. The first element is fire, a symbol of burning, passion, willpower, and pain. I remember clearly the phases when I was cornered, when the money was gone, trust was shaken, and all my plans had collapsed. That was when fire arrived, not to consume me, but to burn away illusions. It forced me to confront my old self, the one who chased wealth with urgency, pressure, and fear. In that fire, I had to let go. Let go of the false belief that my value depended on how much I earned. Let go of the expectations from others that I had to be successful in the eyes of the crowd. Fire brings pain, but it's a pain with purpose. It burns away the falsehoods so that something authentic can begin to emerge. Once I dared to stand in the fire, the second element appeared: earth. Earth is roots, structure, stability, and discipline. I began relearning how to organize my life, not haphazardly based on inspiration, but grounded in foundation and order. I rebuilt my personal finance system, learned how to budget, manage cash flow, and most importantly, keep promises to myself. Earth didn't give me the high that motivational videos often promise, but it gave me a solid foundation to stand on even when financial storms rolled in, and I understood. To be sustainably wealthy, you can't rely on fire alone. You need earth to plant, to hold, and to keep from being swept away by your own passion. As I started to feel inner stability, the third element emerged: water. If fire burns and earth builds, water softens, heals, and reconciles. This was the phase where I had to face my emotional relationship with money. I wrote a letter to money itself and discovered that for years I had harbored a vague guilt whenever I held it. as if I didn't deserve it, as if being wealthy meant betraying my identity. Water taught me forgiveness. Forgiveness for the past, for mistakes, for the times I spent recklessly just to fill an emotional void. I learned to talk to money like a friend, not a tool. And I began to feel ease and flow. Opportunities came more gently. Decisions were no longer driven by fear, but by understanding. The final element is air, pure, invisible, yet the breath of everything. Air is faith, it's vision, it's the energy you emit. When you're no longer trapped by fear or consumed by blind ambition, I began to understand that truly wealthy people aren't just richer in money. They operate on a different frequency. They live in an energy field that makes others want to collaborate, to open doors, to trust them. I'm not speaking of the law of attraction in a mystical sense. I'm talking about the internal state you carry when you're light enough to rise, confident enough to persist, and clear enough to stop proving yourself. Air helped me expand, not by adding more to my plate, but by opening my heart, by learning to trust in a current larger than myself. From that point forward, I began to run my work and life like a process of alchemy, where every day I didn't just work to earn money, but practiced to maintain those four elements, keeping the fire of passion alive without letting it burn me, holding the earth firm without becoming rigid, letting water soothe without being swept away, and breathing the air of trust that sustains everything. And it's this balance, not lacking, not excessive, that has created a new flow of prosperity in my life, a flow no longer dependent on markets, untouched by comparison, and unshaken by scarcity, a flow guided by awakening and wholeness. I no longer think I need $1 million to feel wealthy. I feel wealthy when I can sleep peacefully without faking who I am tomorrow. I feel wealthy when I can choose partners based on alignment, not desperation. I feel wealthy when I can turn down a great opportunity because I know what's truly best for me. And what I want to share with you today is not some magical method to get rich. It's an invitation to begin your own inner alchemy. Ask yourself, what is my fire? What am I burning, and am I letting it consume me? Examine, is my earth strong enough to hold what I want to build? Listen, is the water in me flowing gently or being suppressed? And reflect, the air I'm breathing, does it carry faith or anxiety disguised as ambition? Only when all four elements are nourished can you create gold. Not just in your bank account, but in every lived experience. Because true prosperity is not in the materials you collect, but in the energy you radiate. And once you master that energy, money is no longer the goal, it becomes a companion. Gentle, honest, and deeply meaningful. For many years, I lived with a vague belief that if I just do good, the universe will eventually reward me with what I deserve. I thought that as long as I worked hard, stayed kind, had dreams, then one day my time would come. But that day never arrived, not because I hadn't tried hard enough, but because I had never made a clear commitment. I was living as if I were just testing the waters, half in, half unsure. Until I finally did one thing, I wrote a contract with myself and with the universe. You might be thinking that sounds a bit mystical, even strange, but let me tell you what happened. One sleepless night, my mind swirling with questions like, am I even on the right path? I suddenly got up, grabbed a pen and paper, and began to write. Not a list of goals, not a 5-year plan, but a spiritual covenant. A clearly defined vow to my life itself. I wrote as if I were signing an actual agreement. No lawyers, no witnesses, but the deepest contract I had ever made. In that contract, I didn't ask the universe for help. I declared I choose to live a prosperous life. I choose to use my talents, devotion, and kindness to create value. I commit to not retreating when challenges come, to not living by laziness or fear, and to not abandoning myself. I will walk as if what I desire has already begun. because I know. The universe always responds to the seriousness of my intent. Those were the opening lines. And when I finished writing, I didn't feel relieved. I felt a tremor, as if I had activated a signal and something on the other end was listening. From that day forward, I began living like someone who had signed a real contract. I stopped procrastinating. I stopped saying, I'll try, and started saying, I will do it. I no longer asked whether the world was fair. I asked, have I kept my word? When I worked, I showed up with a level of presence I had never accessed before. No more just get it done, but do this as if it were a vow. I no longer begged the universe for chances. I acted as if the opportunity had arrived, and I had to prove I was worthy of holding it. And the strange thing was, everything began to shift. Opportunities came, but not as lucky breaks. They came as the ripened fruit of dedication. Others sensed the change in me, not because I spoke louder or seemed more skilled, but because I was clearer. When you are clear about the life you choose to live, the world responds as if it just received your transmission. I've come to believe the universe does not reward the most talented. It rewards the most committed. Seriousness here is not stiffness, it's wholeness. A steady intention that does not waver, a grounded inner certainty that does not depend on others' validation to believe in one's own worth. When you are serious about your path, you walk differently. You rise early not because of an alarm clock, but because something inside you won't let you stay in bed. You care about your work, not because someone's evaluating you, but because you know this is the imprint you are leaving on the universe. The contract I wrote isn't just something to reread occasionally, it's something to live. It speaks through every behavior, every word, every decision. It becomes a reminder when I feel tempted to quit, a beacon when I drift off course, a checkpoint when things feel uncertain. And every time I honor that contract, I feel a flow aligning between me and life itself. No more tug of war, no more struggle or demand. Instead, cooperation, resonance, a sacred rhythm of you take a step, I'll take a step. I was no longer walking alone. I also realized you don't have to be spiritual to understand the power of commitment. Even in everyday life, we respect those who keep their word, trust those who are clear, and collaborate with those who know what they want. So why would we live without commitment to ourselves? Why act as if we can just try it out, wing it, see what happens? I no longer live that way because I've seen uncertainty is just a disguised form of delay. And the universe does not respond to blurred signals. But you may be standing at a crossroads between choices, between dreams and reality, between faith and doubt. But only when you decide, only when you dare to write it down, not just on paper, but in action, that you've chosen your path, does the flow begin to move in the direction you guide it. A contract doesn't have to be poetic. It just needs to be written with absolute honesty, with yourself, with the life you want to live, with the presence you want to bring into this world. I'm not telling you this story so you'll copy me and write your own contract. I'm telling you this so you'll ask yourself, have I truly chosen, or am I still just trying? And if you have chosen, are you serious enough to live as if the universe is listening to every step you take? I don't believe the universe is some divine being handing out rewards, but I do believe it is a perfect system of reflection. It mirrors the energy you emit, the beliefs you carry, the actions you repeat. And when you broadcast signals of clarity, kindness, commitment, and consistency, life cannot ignore you for long. I know, because I've lived it. And I hope that from this story you'll begin to live not as if one day is a vague dream, but as if one day is something you are constructing, hour by hour, decision by decision, promise by promise kept to yourself. And it all begins with one commitment, one contract, one line you dare to write, and one version of yourself you dare to become. George was a man I met on a long journey, far away from the city, from the noise, from the modern world's chaos. By conventional standards, he wasn't rich, no big bank account, no fancy house or car, no social media to showcase anything. Yet something about George held my gaze. Maybe it was the calm in his eyes. Maybe the unhurried way he walked across the cracked earth. Or maybe it was the moment he poured the last drops of water from his empty bottle for a complete stranger, rather than saving them for himself. That day, the sun was scorching. Our group was hiking across a barren mountain path, and our water supplies had nearly run out. When we stopped to rest, I saw a local man, sunburned, frail, trembling from exhaustion. He couldn't speak, only held out a shaking hand, pleading silently for water. George stood beside me, having just taken the final sip from his bottle. I still had a little water left in my backpack, but instinct told me to save it because the journey ahead was long. But George didn't hesitate. He opened his bottle, tilted it, and let the very last drops fall into the cracked hands of that stranger. Not a word, not a trace of hesitation. Then he simply walked on as if the gesture were the most natural thing in the world. I was stunned, not because George was overly generous, but because I realized how long I had been living in a mindset of scarcity. That mindset made me fear losing, fear lacking, fear not having enough. It made me give conditionally, help with calculations, love with limits. Outwardly, I often said, it's good to share, but deep down, I clung tight. Not because I was selfish, but because I was afraid. And it was that fear that had choked the flow of abundance in my life more than any business failure I'd ever faced. Later, I asked George, weren't you afraid of running out of water, afraid of being thirsty? He smiled and replied gently as a breeze, of course, but I'm more afraid of becoming selfish.